Hey folks, welcome to the first major lecture on Chapter 1 in the Reader. And as you know, if you've taken a look, we're going to be talking about basic critical thinking. Let me mention that you should be doing the full readings as well as watching these videos. So watching the videos does not count as a substitute for doing the readings. You should do both. Ideally, you should do the readings before watching the video and allow me to clarify anything that may have been unclear or to emphasize certain points from the reading. The PowerPoints are available in the module, as you probably saw, but I will also be including them in this video, so they should pop up on the screen occasionally. Please note that not every PowerPoint slide will pop up, because as you can probably tell, some of the slides are more designed for classroom, face-to-face classroom engagement. So there may be some PowerPoint slides that appear in the provided PowerPoint that aren't in the video. So, as noted in the reader, the major ideas are listed in the chapter kind of as a study guide, as a focus to help you get the most out of the material and to focus in on central ideas that are important. So as you can see here for Chapter 1, we have 6 major ideas, and one is the dual processing model of mind, the other is the branches of philosophy, critical thinking. We're going to define that term because this is a critical thinking class. And then we're going to look at claims, issues, and arguments. Now, claims, issues, and arguments, that particular major idea, those are all linked, but a lot of the classwork is going to focus on those. And let me just say that kind of understanding what an argument is the essence of this part of the class. As we'll see, an argument is not a verbal dispute in the academic sense. An argument is much more like a logical line of connected ideas, whereas an argument in the verbal sense, like a boyfriend and girlfriend fighting, often involves zero logic, right? It's just pure emotion. So argument in the everyday sense, like in everyday life, it isn't quite the same as an academic argument. So that's a source of confusion for a lot of students. So let me just eliminate that misunderstanding to begin with. We are then going to look at cognitive biases, the biggest one being the confirmation bias, which I'm sure at least some of you have heard of at this point. Cognitive biases are important because arguments are supposed to provide the best evidence or the best reasons for something. And cognitive biases give us bad reasons. Which is why the term bias is there. It's a bad way of making a judgment. It's a bad way of drawing a conclusion. And it does not lead to the truth. So that's another aspect of this class that we'll talk about, is that arguments are supposed to get us closer to understanding reality, how things work, what's true. Now, the question of what truth is a deep question, and one we'll address in Chapter 2. But anyways, we'll talk about biases, and then we'll talk about beliefs, which is the last major idea, because the way we make arguments is through the process of belief, so we have to kind of understand that difference too. So those are the major topics of discussion for this part of the class, for Chapter 1, the major ideas. Now, the next part of the PowerPoint I'm going to skip over because this involves an activity that I normally do in the classroom with my students, but as you'll see, this activity has been transferred online to my first discussion board. And this is an activity that asks you to answer a bunch of simple math problems. So I'm not going to say anything more about that. I'll just talk about the theory that it leads to. I'm not going to go over the activity. And I actually encourage you to maybe go do that activity on the discussion board first, before you even listen further to this video. It's a very simple activity. You can just go try it out. It's just a few folders ahead in the module, and then maybe come back here and it'll make more sense. But either way, I'm going to kind of talk about now, here's a spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the point of this activity. So in this activity, you're asked these very simple math problems that all have the answer, the number 14. 7 times 2, what's that? 14. What's 14 minus 0? 14. And there's 5 or 6 other ones that are the same, leading to the same answer. So the point of this isn't just to test our math skills, right, or to be redundant or repetitive, but it's to prime your brain, as you probably know if you already did the activity. 14, 14, 14, right? That's what psychologists call priming. It's putting an unconscious sort of sensor, so to speak, into your brain that is then going to link to another idea. So what happens in this case is that you prime your brain with 14, and because the phrase 14 karat is a common phrase in pop culture, and even if you're not a fan of 14 karat gold, you've probably seen it, right? You've probably heard the term bling. You probably watched some show where someone mentioned it. It's in other words, that term 14 karat is floating around in the back of your brain. So that's what leads to, in most studies on this particular experiment, somewhere around half the respondents say carat because of the 14 and carat connection. So what that shows is that you're engaging in fast thinking. And fast thinking is immediate, direct processing of information without any conscious reflection. And the conscious reflection part, that's the other half, according to this dual processing model of how our brains work, and that's slow thinking. Right? So, to put it simply, when you see you're out taking a hike or something, you're out camping, and you see a stick in the distance that's curved, and your brain first tells you that's a snake, stay away, that's your fast thinking coming in, because it immediately comes to you. Say, oh, curved thing, snake, dangerous, not going to touch it, right? That's all going on in your brain almost instantly. That's fast thinking. Slow thinking is when you say, oh, wait a minute, let me look carefully. Is that really a snake? And you kind of start to investigate it. You look a little more closely. You take a step forward and you say, oh, no, it's just a curved stick. That's the slow thinking part, the processing. So going back to the whole 14 thing, many people, their slow thinking, their fast thinking, their immediate association takes them from 14 to carat. And that's an example of slow processing. Now, let me just reveal a big misunderstanding of this exercise. It does not mean, this exercise is not saying that some people are slow thinkers and others are fast thinkers. The exercise is homing in on the specific way that some people think fast. It's saying, in other words, it's not saying that some people are slow and some people are fast. It's saying that we all are slow and fast thinkers. Now, some of you are probably thinking, yeah, but I'm not a fast thinker because I didn't think of carrot. Well, you misunderstood the exercise. The exercise was just showing one common association that was based on fast thinking. But if you thought of, say, broccoli, or asparagus, or eggplant, or onions, or chili peppers, many other things you could have thought of, those were also examples of fast thinking. The difference is that in your case, the 14 karat gold association wasn't as strong, and something else may have overridden it. So for instance, let's say you said broccoli. That means that you either like broccoli or you hate it, because if you hate it, it'll be equally prominent in your mind, right, when you think of vegetable. Broccoli may be the go-to vegetable that comes to your mind when someone mentions vegetables. That may be why you thought of it. It may be that you recently ate it, right? Whatever it is, there's some recent experience, some causal story in your brain we could look at and interrogate, and we could discover that you were led to that choice through a process of fast thinking. So in other words, don't pat yourself on the back if you didn't think of carrot, because the exercise has no right or wrong answer. It is just trying to home in on one particular way that people might think fast to illustrate the concept. But you still thought fast if you thought of another vegetable. Okay, so anyways, and now I hope that helps to explain the difference between slow and fast thinking. Again, slow thinking, it's just what it sounds like. Slow thinking is taking the time to process information, and fast thinking is immediate processing. It's that basic. But again, I want to emphasize that we all, according to the theory that has a lot of evidence supporting it, we all think fast and slow at different times, myself included, right? So it's not like you're smarter so you think slow more often. As human beings, we all have the capacity to do both, and that's the point. Now, the reason why it's important to this class and why we're doing it is that this class focuses on slow thinking. Right? Philosophy is about slow thinking. It's about deep processing, slowing down our thoughts to see what's really going on. And so you need to appreciate that slow thinking isn't always pleasant, right? A lot of times it's easier just to go with the flow and let the fast thinking take over. But fast thinking is where cognitive bias comes from, as we'll talk about later. So fast thinking can actually lead us to wrong conclusions. That's why it's so important to, at least sometimes, in the most important times, to come in with slow thinking and really analyze something, right? So in other words, fast thinking is easier. I don't really have to think fast. I don't really have to process much when I'm just watching an action movie, and that's valuable. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But sometimes slow thinking is necessary to really think through the implications of something. And that's really what philosophy is all about. Try to figure something out by really engaging deeply with it. So anyways, that being said, now that I've transitioned to philosophy itself, let me tell you about let me say a little bit more about philosophy itself. So first of all, philosophy means, it literally translates from the Greek as love of wisdom, and that raises the question of the difference between wisdom and knowledge, which is addressed in the reading, and I may address in this video later. But philosophy means a love of wisdom. So people who are philosophers are people who want to be wise in one way or another. Now, over the years, we've divided up what philosophers and academics talk about into three basic categories, and these still are very influential today. So this is an example of how learning the terms of philosophy will help you subsequently understand many other disciplines and do well in them. So, for example, the theory epistemology, the branch of philosophy epistemology about knowledge and learning, that word epistemology is heavily used in other disciplines. So philosophy is sort of a foundation, and there's some argument to be made that it's really the first academic discipline that existed, and other disciplines branched off from it. So kind of studying one of the first academic disciplines can help us see how the academic world works. And anyways, the three branches of philosophy are metaphysics, epistemology, and value theory. Value theory is sometimes divided up into other branches. It's sometimes called axiology. I'm not going to do that. I think it's basically just know that value theory is exactly what it sounds like when people talk about different ways we value things. So for example, one branch of value theory is political philosophy. And if you're going to go into political science, you will certainly take a political philosophy class at some point, or you'll at least do the readings. And you'll certainly read Plato's Republic, which is a master of political philosophy. But anyways, that relates to value because political philosophy studies, like, what is the best, quote unquote, form of government? Right? Is it one that's more of a libertarian style, that has a smaller reach, has smaller funding? Is it a smaller government overall? Or is it a more on the socialist side, where there's more social programs and social nets and so forth? What's the best way? So studying that, as I hope you can tell, is a matter of value. And the arguments made there will be based on different competing values. But also within the realm of value theory is ethics. Again, how do we treat people? What's the best way to behave? What's the best way to advance yourself? And of course, many of you, I'm sure, think that, well, it's all just subjective and relative. There's no real ultimate truth there. That may be. And we will study that view, known as cultural or moral relativism, later in the class. But one thing I want to at least point out now is that if you believe values are relative, that's not a fact. Right? This is a mistake that students make a lot when they first come to college. They believe that relativism is a fact. It's your own theory, right? It's a theory that values are relative. There's not any knockdown evidence on either side of that debate, as we'll see later. In fact, there's some good evidence that morality is actually universal. Is actually shared by most cultures. There's probably more evidence for that than that it's relative. But, to be fair, it's not a knockdown case on either side. So we'll talk about that later in the class. So anyways, that's values. Metaphysics is kind of the branch of philosophy that gives philosophers a bad name. Because metaphysics is theorizing about highfalutin stuff often that we can't even see. From souls to forces in the universe to what started the Big Bang to God to angels, even to ghosts, to paranormal activity. This is the realm of metaphysics, stuff that is often beyond the physical. But very important to realize that not all metaphysics is, you might think, well, isn't that just religion? Because religion talks about a lot of these things, about souls and reincarnation and so forth. And yes, religions definitely touch on metaphysics, but science does too. So, for example, in theoretical physics, it's not uncommon to hear scientists propose that there are multiple dimensions to the universe, or that there are, and that there are parallel dimensions where, a million versions of me saying this and more are happening simultaneously in some other dimension. That's a metaphysical claim. That's a metaphysical claim. So metaphysics can be a part of science too, when scientists theorize about things that they can't see yet. But once they find evidence for it, it becomes physics. So anyways, we'll get there. That's metaphysics. I already mentioned that epistemology is kind of about knowledge. The only other thing I'm going to mention here is that we are, in this class, primarily focused on epistemology. This class is about critical thinking. It's about knowledge and learning and how our minds work. So this class is actually focused much more in the realm of epistemology than the other two. To be fair, we will touch a little bit on metaphysics and value theory from time to time, but mostly this class is going to be focused on epistemology. In particular, as you'll see from the reader, we're going to be honing in on two different types of knowledge that you probably have already heard the terms of before, and that's inductive reasoning, or reasoning based on probability, versus deductive reasoning, or reasoning based on certainty. So that'll be the main focus of our class. Now, the reason I have that quote there at the bottom of this PowerPoint from the Tao Te Ching, and first of all, the Tao Te Ching is kind of like the Bible of Taoism. And Taoism is an ancient Chinese religion / philosophy. People categorize it differently, which is why I say that. But the central principle behind this belief system is that there are certain things that words do not capture about this universe. There are certain they might be spiritual experiences or spiritual understandings of a higher being, whatever it is. There are certain experiences and parts of this world that don't seem to be represented well with words. And that's basically what the Taoists are saying. So for Taoists, the Tao, it's kind of like their version of God, except they believe God is more like the force, like, if you've ever seen Star Wars, like a force around us in everything. So they believe that the instant you start trying to quantify and say, God is like this, God is like that, you lose the whole essence of God, right? The instant you say that this person is God or this thing was God, you actually lose the essence because the words don't represent the experience. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because we're in a class that is focused on epistemology and logic and critical thinking and evidence. And it may seem like that I'm demanding as though that's the only thing that matters. I just want to emphasize that this class is not saying that. I'm not saying that logic and evidence and reason are the only thing that matter in life, but they do matter. And so when they matter, when you need logic and reason, that's when you will come back to this class. And you need logic and reason a lot. Like when you're deciding, am I going to move to this city or that city? Am I going to go to this college or that college? What am I going to major in? How do I do this assignment in my class? How do I analyze this research project? Right? These are all cases where understanding how to reason well, a skill this class will teach you, will be very useful. So anyways, I appreciate that there are things beyond this class. I'm only teaching you what I'm teaching you. I believe in it because it's practical when you need it, not for every moment of your life. So let's get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty here of the definition of critical thinking, right? It's a critical thinking class, we better define the term. And there's a few different definitions out there, but my favorite of that I've come across, and this comes from a book that I cite in the reader, by actually, one of them was a former professor of mine. The book is by Moore and Parker. Parker was my professor. And they define critical thinking as the careful application of reason in determining whether a claim is true. Emphasis on careful. Right? Critical thinkers are careful. They do not draw overbearing conclusions. They do not overgeneralize. You will rarely hear a good critical thinker make claims like all of this or everything happens that way or nothing ever happens that way. Sometimes it's justified to make a broad claim like that, but often it's not. So a very simple way to say this is that critical thinking is just slow thinking, right? It's just thinking about thinking. What I was saying before, it's just turning your reflective process inward on your own thoughts and on your own beliefs. That's critical thinking, rather than not using it at all or only focusing on other people. So that's a big aspect of critical thinking, is that it's very easy to recognize when other people are making are using faulty reasoning. It's much harder to see it in ourselves. So this class will not only help you understand good critical thinking in other people and bad critical thinking in others, but both in yourself as well, the good and the bad, if you let it, right? Obviously, there's many people who, right, a class can't work for you unless you're willing to meet it halfway and put some effort in. So anyways, that's critical thinking. Now, I did want to mention a couple other examples. So sometimes people believe that there are those who are just born with better critical thinking skills than others. Now, that's not quite true, because critical thinking skills are learned to a large degree. I'm not saying that there aren't people who have a greater quantitative understanding of something. Like, in other words, some people are just better at math. Some people are better at they see the relationships between numbers easier. And there's no question there's something inborn or biological about that. But that's not the same as critical thinking, right? People can be very smart and think very poorly because they don't know how to apply that knowledge, or they just never learned it. So I often use the example of former NASA astronaut Lisa Nowak. And if you haven't heard of her, just do a quick Google search, Lisa Nowak. She basically, first of all, she's an astronaut in NASA. You know, you don't get to that position without having a good brain in your head, right? She obviously was a smart person. However, she ended up getting involved in a love triangle with another male astronaut, and apparently this other male astronaut was, and I can't remember the details, so forgive me if I don't get it exactly right, but something happened where she basically ends up going to confront this other male astronaut and a female astronaut that he was with now, that he was seeing, and Lisa Nowak hears about this, that they're together, and drives halfway across the country in an astronaut diaper, so she doesn't have to stop to go to the bathroom, with like a BB gun to threaten the other woman. Right? Now tell me that isn't the behavior of like an 11-year-old, right? And yet she was a NASA astronaut. So critical thinking can take the day off, even if you're very smart. And this is all the more reason why it's important to be vigilant over your own behavior. Because otherwise, no matter how smart you are, critical thinking can take the day off. So no one's a perfect critical thinker either. Everyone, even the smartest, most vigilant person, they're going to make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. So we're not striving here for perfection, but to be a good critical thinker, you got to be honest and open and willing to change your mind and so forth. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. What matters more is that you're open-minded. And this actually brings me to the next slide, just to give you a historical example, a case study of someone who is pretty much the most open-minded, one of the most open-minded, knowledgeable men in history. And indeed, he's often compared with Jesus and Buddha in many favorable ways. And that's obviously Socrates. So there's a famous story about Socrates, and I'll briefly tell it to you. And it comes from a dialogue of Plato called The Republic. I'm sorry, not The Republic. It comes from a dialogue of Plato called the Apology. And in the Apology, basically, Socrates has been put on trial and been accused by the people of Athens. Ancient Athens was kind of the central part of ancient Greece where a lot of this stuff happened. On a side note, if anybody has played Assassin's Creed Odyssey, You can play through Athens and see the city as it would have, may have been, one artist's conception of how the city would have been back then. And it's pretty cool. And Socrates is actually in the game, oddly enough, and you get to debate with him. It's interesting. But anyways, Socrates, historically speaking, was put on trial, and he was accused of teaching of gods that weren't recognized by the state. He was probably teaching against the gods, and he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens. So in other words, he would often go into the city and talk to young, powerful, influential men, and he would sometimes teach them to doubt those in power. So in other words, he pissed off those in power, and he got put to death. But in this trial, and by the way, in that picture, you can see that Socrates in the middle, and he's just been sentenced to death after the trial, and he, despite giving an eloquent defense, there were too many people out to get him, he got sentenced to death, and he was actually offered escape, and notice, and he said, no, that would go against my integrity, and so he ends up drinking this hemlock, which is depicted in that picture, a poison. So he's about to die in that picture. And notice that he doesn't care, while everyone else around him is sad and crying that the great man is gonna die. So that's supposed to show the strength of Socrates' character, right? He wasn't even afraid of death. But anyways, in that defense, in the apology, he tells a story. And he tells the story of a friend who went to see the Oracle of Athens. And the Oracle of Athens was somebody who had great influence in the ancient world. Oracles in general had a lot greater influence than they have today, kind of like fortune tellers. But people came from all around the Greek world to talk to her. And so one person goes in and talks to the oracle, and Socrates is relating this in his speech to the Athenian people to defend himself against the charges. And he says, well, this guy goes up to the oracle and says, who's the wisest man in Athens? And the oracle immediately responds, Socrates, but doesn't give a reason why. And so later, this guy tells Socrates, says, hey, I asked the oracle, and the oracle said, you're the wisest man. And Socrates immediately says, I don't believe it. I don't think that's true. He said, there's so many other people who are wiser than I am. It's ridiculous that the oracle would say that. And so he sets out to disprove the oracle. He goes around the city talking to different people who are supposedly wise. He goes into one area and says, okay, who's the person you look up to here? Who's the wisest person? And they say, oh, go talk to him. You go talk to her. He talks to all these people, and what he discovers is that while these people have an understanding of their own area of expertise, they pretend that they understand things that go beyond their expertise. Right? So in other words, they might be experts at, say, blacksmithing, but they start talking about politics and math and poetry as though they also know about that. So they fancy themselves experts on everything just because they know something about one thing. And what Socrates realized was that the reason the oracle said he was the wisest is that he was the only one who knew that he didn't know. In other words, he was aware of his own ignorance in particular cases, and he would be willing to say, hey guys, I don't really know anything about that, but maybe you can help me understand. Everybody else, even if they didn't know, they would pretend to know. They would say, oh, let me tell you all about this, even though they clearly didn't get it. Socrates was always willing to say, I don't know. Now, no, don't misunderstand that. The claim that he knew he didn't know doesn't mean he didn't know anything. It's that he was willing to admit his ignorance when it was appropriate. So that approach to life, that approach to critical thinking is one that we should all cultivate in this class, and that's the willingness to go into a debate or an idea and be really open-minded and be willing to be educated by people who know more than we know about something. Right? Not to come in as pretending that we're an expert on something when we have no information and no understanding, we haven't done the research. So that's the attitude of critical thinking that I think we want to try to cultivate here, is one of a deep, open-minded interest and honesty about what we're talking about. And Socrates represented that very well. Okay, so let's get a little bit more down to earth here with some of the nitty gritty of the class. So some of the terminology: claims, issues, and arguments. So a claim is more or less a statement. You might think of a claim as just a statement, or as a proposition, as it's sometimes called, something that in principle can be true or false. And it can also be subjective or objective, and I'll talk about that difference in a minute. An issue is when we raise a question about a claim, we call it into question and say, hey, is this true? Was that the case? Is that right? And then an argument is the justification process, when we say, yeah, that was right, and here's why. Yes, it's true, and this is why it's true. So in other words, what if somebody says, makes a claim, global warming is man-caused, let's say. Global warming is man-caused. And then somebody raises an issue and says, well, how do you know that? How do you know that global warming is man-caused? The issue was raised, a question was asked, and then let's say the first person who made the claims comes back and says, well, it's man-caused because we have climate models that show a significant contribution of human behavior to the level of CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, you don't have to agree with that. I want to point that out. You maybe have a different conclusion from the evidence, but that person still made an argument because they provided a justification for the claim that they produced. So that's all it is. It seems more complicated than it is. A claim is just, hey, this is what something is like, or this is what it should be, this is what it is, and then why is it that way? Here's why. Then that's the argument. The issue, why? The argument, here's why. Here's the justification. Here's the reason. Right? So an argument has at least two claims, and it includes at least one reason. Now, as we'll get into later, the reasons given we'll get into now, but we'll get into more depth later. The reasons given to believe a claim, those are also claims. The reasons given, they're claims. Those reasons are called premises, and the claim you're trying to prove or support, that you're trying to provide evidence for, that's called the conclusion. So let's use a very simple example here. Let's say I have a claim that it's raining. It's raining. Let's say I made the claim that it is raining. And now that's just a claim because it only involves one statement. It is raining. Right? It can't be an argument yet. But then let's say somebody says, well, how do you know it's raining? And then I come back and I give an argument. They raised an issue. I say, how do you know it's raining? Right? Is it raining? They raise an issue. And I come back and say, I know it's raining because there's water falling from the sky and I can see it outside the door or the window. Now I've provided an argument because I have more than one claim linked together. My premise, what's my premise? There's water falling from the sky that I can see. That's my claim supporting my conclusion, which is that it is raining. Now I know that probably seems fairly simple to many of you, but just remember that it can get quite complicated, and it's important to always understand in an argument the direction of the logic. What is the conclusion that's being drawn? In other words, the conclusion is more or less, what the hell is this person telling me? So those are claims, issues, and arguments. Now, there are cases where claims, let's talk a little bit about the fact that I said some of which can be true or false. Expressions of belief, some of which can be true or false. So what does that mean? Does that mean that some claims can't be true and can't be false? Well, yes, there are some claims that we in logic say have an unknown truth value, meaning that we don't yet have enough information to say if it's true or false. So for instance, there's life on other planets is a perfect example. Right? There's life on other planets. A lot of people say, hey, the universe is so big and we've detected Earth-like planets around other stars. There's a strong probability. That's still not proof yet, though. Right? So this is not a question that we can conclusively say is true or false. The same would be true of parallel dimensions that I mentioned earlier. We can't conclusively say these are true or false. So these claims have an unknown truth value. So it's just important to note that some claims are obviously true, like the Earth is round, the third planet from the sun, And then some claims are obviously false, like the T-Rex still roams the earth. But other claims, we don't know how we can, we don't have enough information yet. Now, this also touches on a fallacy. A fallacy is a mistaken reasoning that we'll talk about later. And one fallacy is called the untestable explanation. There are also claims that we don't even know how we could ever find out if they're true. Sometimes you hear these in spiritual conversations, like we all exist in the mind of God. I mean, it sounds cool, but how would we ever know if that's true or false? Right? So there are other things that, other claims that we can't ever know, it seems. What about objective versus subjective? This is an often misunderstood distinction. So subjective means that its truth depends on your opinion. Right? If your opinion goes away, the truth of something goes away. That's what subjective means. But objective means that regardless of your opinion, something is true or false. So in other words, let's go back to the Earth being the third planet from the sun. You can believe it's the second planet from the sun all you want, but you are wrong. Right? You are believing something that is untrue. So it's objective because your belief doesn't change the fact. Right? Your belief doesn't change the laws of physics. You can believe the laws of physics are different, but gravity is going to pull you down to the earth in the way that it does, right? No matter what you believe. So, one more time, an objective claim does not matter. Its truth value, whether it's true or not, has no relation to your belief. But a subjective claim, whether it's true or not, has every relation to your belief. It's completely dependent upon it. So let me give you some examples. Let's say I said Barack Obama was a cool president. That would be subjective, right? Because the idea of being cool is dependent on the observer. That's subjective because it depends only on that speaker as to whether Obama is cool. If that speaker stops believing Obama is cool, that doesn't mean Obama is still cool, right? It depends on his opinion of him for Obama to be cool. And one of the reasons is that the term cool is not very clearly defined. Now, this is a tricky part of these claims, is that if we got more specific about it, then we could actually turn it into an objective claim. So for instance, if I said something like, Barack Obama had a very high approval rating during his second term or something like that, or during his first term, right? That's something that could be true or false. That would be an objective claim. But if I just say that he's cool, then that's my own opinion, right? So I hope that difference is clear. Now, a claim is still objective even if it's false. So this is sort of an area where students have a misunderstanding as well, often. Objective just means it can be researched, it can be proven true or false. There is a way to do that independent of what people think, right? So objective doesn't mean it's true. There's a difference. So for example, let's say I made the claim that San Diego is closer to Mexico than to Oregon, right? That San Diego is closer to Mexico than to Oregon. That's an objective claim that's also true. But what if I said San Diego is closer to Oregon than Mexico? San Diego is closer to Oregon than Mexico. That's also an objective claim, but it's false. It's objective because its truth, whether it's true or not, is independent of what anyone believes, right? Including the speaker. The speaker's belief does not make it that San Diego is closer to Oregon than Mexico, right? It does not, that being true or false does not depend on the speaker's belief. So just remember that an objective claim can be true or false. Now here's a tricky one. What if I said God exists? That's first of all, that's a claim. God exists. We're making a claim that something is the case. A higher power has existence. Is that an objective or a subjective claim? Now, many of you are probably going to say, well, it's subjective, because to you, you have a very personal view and belief in God. It's very personal to you, I would imagine, if you're going to say that. However, it depends what you mean by God. Right? If you mean that there is truly a being who created all of us, not just you, but who created everything we observe, that's a very much an objective claim when you say God exists, because either that is true or it's not, right? Either that's not just in your head. Either God created everything or he did not do it. So that is an objective claim, very much so, in that sense. But if by God exists you just mean you have a personal relationship with God, then of course that can be subjective, and there's nothing wrong with that. So again, this illustrates why defining terms is very important. And by the way, just on a side note, anytime you talk about God, good idea to define God, because people have vastly different conceptions of what God is or means. And let me just give you an obvious example of an objective claim, right? What if I said, there is an oak table in my living room, right? There is an oak table in my living room. That would clearly be objective. And in this case, it's true. I do have a table made of oak in my living room. Right? But notice that if there wasn't a table made of oak in my living room, it would still be objective, right? Because in principle, it can be proven true or false. All right. Okay, so there's one other thing I want to point to before moving on regarding subjective and objective, and that's that an objective claim can sometimes refer to a person's psychological state rather than to the content of the claim. So, for example, if I was in a class teaching face-to-face, and let's say I had talked to a student, let's just call her Jennifer, and let's say she told me she believes in God. If I made the claim, if I said Jennifer believes in God, that would be an objective claim, because it's about her belief. It's not about does God exist. So that doesn't run into the same problems we had before of defining God, because we're just referring to she believes it. Or let's go back to the Barack Obama thing, right? What if I said Barack Obama was a cool president to me, or I think Barack Obama was a cool president? That would be objective. And this is tricky. Just by adding the words to me or I think, we're shifting the focus of the sentence, of the claim, to your psychological state of thinking that, or it's seeming that way to you, rather than to the thing you were saying before, right? So if I say Barack Obama is a cool president, that is subjective, right? Because I'm just stating that the essence of the subject of the sentence, of the claim, is the coolness of Barack Obama, right? But if I say Barack Obama is a cool president to me, now I'm focusing on my belief about Obama, right? And now that's the focus. So if I believe that Barack Obama was cool, then that is an objective claim that I believe it. Not that he's cool, right? If I say he's cool, that's subjective. But if I say I think he's cool, then it's objective. Now, I know that's a little bit of a tricky distinction, but hopefully the homework will help you work through that difficulty. Let me say a few more things about arguments. First of all, let me just say that determining whether an argument is good or bad is kind of the core of this class. Right? Everything else is working around to help guide you towards how do I recognize good reasons for a belief? How do I recognize a good argument versus a bad one? And people are throwing arguments at you all over the place, right? They're throwing emotion at you too, but arguments are being thrown around all the time in society, whether it's an article you're reading in the National Review or the Atlantic or the New York Times, or it's a Twitter battle you're having, or whether it's commenting on YouTube videos. Arguments are there. And the question is, we want you to come out of college, and I want you to come out of this class with the ability to recognize a good argument versus a bad one. So, that's kind of the crux of the class. Now, in a good argument, as I mentioned before, there's two styles, and we're going to go into depth on these. There's two types of arguments. An argument can either support the conclusion strongly, which is like building up evidence for a case, like a murder trial or something. That's inductive reasoning, where the conclusion is rendered more likely based on the evidence provided, the reasons, the premises given. The other form of argumentation is known as deductive reasoning, and this is based on certainty, and this is an argument in which the conclusion is rendered certain. The conclusion becomes certain as a result of the truth of the premises that were given, or the reasons given. So, Arguments are also often controversial. They often make controversial claims. So, we should go to war. We shouldn't go to war is often a conclusion to a political argument. The refugees and the migrant caravan at the border that many have been talking about. We should help them. We shouldn't help them. Those are controversial claims either way. And we should understand controversy broadly, right? A controversial claim might just be something that's challenging an understanding. Like, well, no, I thought you said that the movie starts at this time, but I checked here and it starts here, right? So it's something that challenges our current understanding of something. Now, not all arguments have a direct controversial claim, so I want to make that clear. It's just a way to help you recognize the conclusion in many arguments is to find that controversial claim, right? If you see someone talking about abortion, you're going to search what do they believe about abortion? Are they saying it's right or wrong? Are they saying it's sometimes right and sometimes wrong? What's their conclusion? And so forth. It's going to be controversial by definition. So again, that's a helpful way to help you identify an argument. Now, I want to just give you some examples before I move on to the last two parts of the lecture here. And so this first example is, so before we even get into analyzing this, because let me just point out that this is exactly what you'll be faced with. You'll see a passage like this on the assessment and you'll have some options and you'll want to know how best you can answer this question, obviously. And so what I'm going to help you do is do that here with a couple examples. So let's say you saw this passage. It says, Hillary Clinton is totally an insider. She's worked in Washington her whole life, and 90% of her campaign contributions come from Wall Street donors. So first of all, the question is this an argument? Let's just say. And remember, an argument... No, actually, there's one other thing that I didn't mention about arguments that I need to mention. And that's that in an argument, there is a relevant connection between the premises and conclusion given. That's actually what distinguishes an argument, good reasoning, from a fallacy that we'll talk about later, bad reasoning. So an argument has to have relevance between the premise and conclusion. Just to briefly go back to what I was saying about the rain example. If I say it's raining because there's water falling from the sky, that's an argument. I provided evidence for why it's raining. But what if I said it's raining because there's water flowing in the gutter? Not really relevant to, there could be water in the gutter because someone's washing their car, right? That wouldn't be a good reason to believe that it's raining. So what I'm pointing out there is there has to be relevance between premise and conclusion. So now let's go back to the Hillary Clinton one. Is there relevance between the premise and conclusion? And also, what is the conclusion and what are the premises? Well, the first thing you want to look at, as I just said, can you find an controversial claim? Yeah, I think the first claim is fairly controversial, that she's an insider. What do they mean by that? They mean that she's an elite, that she doesn't, she's connected with all those with power and money. She's not one of us. She's not a populist. She's not part of the regular population. She's this elite. That's what it means to be an insider, right? That's a fairly controversial thing to say about somebody. And then, okay, but what about the other claims? They're a little bit controversial. She's worked in Washington her whole life and her campaign contributions. But now ask yourself this question. Which claim is providing evidence for the other ones? Right? Is her being an insider evidence that she's worked in Washington? It doesn't really make much sense, right? It's not. Her being an insider is more of a general claim that seems to be supported by these examples, right? So in this case, the conclusion is actually stated first. Another lesson in critical thinking, although I set up many arguments in the reader what's called premise conclusion format. So you can see premise 1, 2, 3, and then the conclusion, right? That's very clear. Although I do that, and many academics do, not all writers do that. So sometimes a writer will draw a conclusion first, and then they'll give their evidence for it. So it's not about the order of the way something's presented, it's about the logic, the connections between ideas. So again, we have here two pieces of evidence that she's worked in Washington her whole life, and a lot of her, and 90% of her contributions came from Wall Street. Those are two pieces of evidence used to support the conclusion that she is an insider. Okay, so now we've recognized that A, this is an argument, and B, we've identified the premises and conclusion and how they're working together. Right? So that's an example of how to think critically about these problems. Now, what if I wanted to state the issue in that argument? Let me say this, and I've said it before in the readings, and I'll say it again probably in future videos. The issue is merely the conclusion of an argument restated as a question. One more time. The issue in a passage is the conclusion of the argument restated as a question. So can you figure out what the issue in this previous argument was? Well, the conclusion is Clinton is an insider. So the issue would then be whether Hillary Clinton is an insider, whether or not Hillary Clinton is an insider. Or the issue would be, is Hillary Clinton an insider? Right? There's different ways to express the question, but it's important to understand there's a difference between expressing a question as to whether something's true and stating it's actually true. The statement that it's actually true, that she is an insider, that's the conclusion, because the person takes a stand on the issue. The issue, though, is just, is she an insider or not? Notice that somebody could take the opposite stand and say, she's not an insider, and here's why. Now, throughout all this analysis, I want to point out that it doesn't matter if you agree with any of these arguments, right? You might think you might be politically liberal, and you might say, oh, it's nonsense, she's not an insider. We're not dealing with the truth of these claims or whether it's a good argument. We're just recognizing the logic involved in the claims. And whatever your political affiliation, that is an argument. Right? The argument, it is an argument. You don't have to agree with an argument for it to be an argument. Okay, so I'm going to present you with a conclusion, and then I'll present you some options, and I want you to think about which one of these options would be most relevant to the conclusion to turn it into an argument. Okay. So here's your conclusion. Citizens should be allowed to carry guns. Option number one. And once again, that's your conclusion. I'm going to present three options. You're going to figure out which one is a relevant premise that, together with the conclusion I just gave you, would turn that into an argument. So if my conclusion is citizens should be allowed to carry guns, my first reason might be there are many different types of guns. Or is my premise the Second Amendment gives us the right to bear arms? Or is my premise the 14th Amendment implies the right to privacy? Okay, so which one of those would most relevantly fit with the conclusion? I'm guessing most of you would say B, because we all know the Second Amendment is the amendment that gives us the right to bear arms. Right now, people disagree on how to interpret it, obviously, but that is clearly relevant to the conclusion. Now, to be fair, the 14th Amendment one wouldn't necessarily be a bad answer, because one could, after all, in Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court justices invoked the 14th Amendment in the woman's right to privacy with her own body as one of the justifications for why abortion should be legal. So one could similarly invoke the right to privacy in carrying a gun. So I'd still say 2 is the most relevant, but 3 would somewhat fit if you added some additional premises as well to the argument. But certainly number 1 would not be relevant. The fact that there are different types of guns is not a good reason for why we should be allowed to carry them. Let's do another God one, another God example here. So let's say my conclusion is God exists. What if I said, and then my conclusion is God exists, so I'll give you 3 potential premises, and you'll tell me which one is a legitimate premise that would turn this into an argument. So if the first premise is, well, my parents and priest say that God exists, therefore God exists. The second is, you'll go to hell if you don't believe in God. And the third is something had to cause the universe. So I hope you can all recognize that 3 is the legitimate premise. Now, let me tell you why 1 and 2 don't work. So premise 1 is what's called an appeal to authority fallacy. Right? The mere fact that a lot of people believe something, or people you respect believe something, that doesn't mean that it's true or it's right. It would be the same thing with evolution. If I said evolution's true only because this really smart biology professor believes it, that would equally be not an argument. Now the second answer says, I hope you can all recognize the problem here. You'll go to hell if you don't believe in God, right? That's a scare tactic, a fallacy that uses emotion to get you to believe something instead of providing evidence or reasons. It'd be like if I said, well, you're going to be grounded if you don't do your homework. Right? It's not really a reason why I should do my homework. It's a reason to be afraid if I don't do my homework. But something had to cause the universe. Right? That's a good reason to believe that there may be a God, because God is supposed to be an all-powerful being who can create at will. Well, that's perfectly relevant to the start or beginning of the universe. Now again, I want to be clear, you don't have to agree with an argument to know that it's an argument, but that is an argument. There's a relevant premise provided connecting to a relevant conclusion. And in fact, it's a famous argument for God, sometimes called the first cause argument or the cosmological argument. Okay, so I'm not going to go over any more examples of those claims, issues, and arguments. You'll get much more practice in the homework and on the practice discussion that targets this material. So make sure to ask questions either on the discussion or to me directly if anything is unclear. All right, a few more things here. Let me just touch on cognitive biases. Now, we already talked about cognitive biases before, and let me remind you that these are basically bad fast thinking. That's what cognitive biases are. They're just really poor examples of fast thinking. Fast thinking can help us sometimes, right? It's good that I recognize the stick instead of the snake because it's going to save my life if it's a rattler or something worse. But it's bad if I use cognitive biases when I'm trying to evaluate Trump or evaluate Bernie Sanders or listen to Fox News or listen to MSNBC. Right? If I'm using cognitive biases in areas where we're trying to find the truth, there's a problem. But if I'm trying to survive in nature, then of course cognitive biases are useful. So there's a list of cognitive biases, of several common ones in the first chapter, and I encourage you to reflect upon those. There's many more. I think somebody tallied that there's actually over like 100 that people have identified. Now, part of the problem is that people are using different terminology for the same cognitive bias. So don't learn all of them, but the ones I present are some of the most commonly, the most common errors in reasoning that are out there. And of course, I hope it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, that recognizing these biases will help you be a better critical thinker. You don't want your whole decision to be based on, say, the availability heuristic. That's one of the biases where we tend to focus on recent examples rather than the overall statistic or probability of something. So for instance, I might say, well, I'm not going to get on a plane because I saw an article about a plane crash yesterday. Even though the statistics on plane crashes have been, steadily going down for years, we tend to oversaturate our minds with the recent example. Right? Do you want your whole decision to be based on a false understanding of reality? Well, that's what happens if you let yourself be driven by cognitive bias. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go over every one, and I've already touched on it anyway, so please go through those from the reading, and don't use them. Okay, belief. So let's get a definition of a belief here, because first of all, there will be some discussion boards where you're required to create an argument, and this will often be based on a belief that you have. So what's a belief? Well, I'm not going to get complicated here and distinguish between judgments and opinions. It's all the same, right? It's a subjective acceptance of something. That's what a belief or judgment or opinion is. It's when you put something of yourself into a claim. Notice that when there are claims that you don't really care about, if they turn out to be false, right? You didn't have much of an attachment to it. You didn't really believe it too deeply. But notice that there are other claims that if you stopped believing it, it might change your entire life. What claims am I thinking about there? Something like a belief in God. People's lives get destroyed when they go from belief in God to maybe a tragedy in their life, and then suddenly they stop believing, right? The whole center they organized their life around is now gone. And vice versa, a person who didn't used to believe and suddenly has a spiritual experience and they start to believe, now they have a whole new center around which to build their life. Right? So beliefs can have incredible impacts on our behavior and our entire life when we really believe them. Now, the reason why they can do that is because of this different level of subjective connection to a belief, right? So if I really am attached to a belief, it's going to hurt if that belief turns out to be false. But if I'm not attached, it's not going to matter. So if I told you guys there's a really good taco truck outside the campus and you got to go check it out, and then I was lying and you went later where I told you to go and you found it wasn't there, your belief that there was a taco truck that I instilled in you, that belief would have been shattered. But that's not going to change your life. You're just going to say, oh, Cuddy's kind of an asshole. He lied to me. Right? But it's not going to make you have a new center or focus of your life. So what's my point here? That there's a sort of a range of variability in belief where we are more attached and less attached. Something to reflect upon as we go throughout the class. And another thing to reflect upon is, are you justified in believing those things you are deeply attached to? And that's only a question you can answer personally. And it's something that philosophy offers you, sort of this deep analysis of your own beliefs that can be very transformative and useful for many people, myself included. One last thing I got to tell you about, and we got to go back to Aristotle, because Aristotle is the father of logic in the Western world. Now, this is not to say that there weren't logical systems that were created in the East and in India as well. There was some ancient Indian logic that employed similar argumentative strategies that we'll talk about that came from Aristotle. There were also some in ancient China. However, some of the logic took a very different form, but some of it's the same. Either way, where they all agree is what Aristotle laid down many years ago. And that's that when we listen to a speaker or when we make an argument ourselves, when we're addressing a passage or a speech or whatever, or a news article with critical thinking, we want to have our minds tuned in for three different things, but we want to focus mainly on one. So those three things are ethos, and ethos would be persuasion through personal attributes, right? In other words, a person might persuade you because they're a very good speaker. Everything they say may be bullshit, but they may be very eloquent and convincing, and they may be handsome or pretty, dressed very nice, they may make eye contact and smile a lot. That's the ethos part. Aristotle would say, not really very important at all to the truth. The pathos part would be being persuaded by emotion. In other words, the person cries on stage, or they tell a very sad example. The common example that's often given is the Sarah McLachlan commercial with the dogs, with the sad music playing in the background and all the sad-looking puppies right up close. That's being persuaded by emotion. But logos, or reason, is what we should be persuaded by. And this whole class is about trying to derail your focus from pathos and ethos onto logos. Right? We should care mostly about the logos. Now, here's the problem, though. There are cases where a person uses all three or both together, and that makes it harder for us because now we have to disentangle the pathos and ethos from the logos. And sometimes that's worth it. So, for example, Al Gore created a movie called Inconvenient Truth, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, in the early 2000s, I believe, and it's basically about global warming. And he used a lot of pathos in that movie. For example, he showed pictures before and after of, I think, the Boulder Glacier, suggesting that there's this huge difference that happened in a small span of years, historically speaking. But here's the other thing. He also had evidence to back up why that change occurred. He also presented lots of scientific evidence from real climate scientists. So in other words, Gore had a movie with a lot of pathos, not denying that, but he also included logos. And what ended up happening with Gore is his message actually got undermined by a lot of people, including from conservative media, because he had so much pathos. So they focused only on the pathos and not on the logos beneath it. So we're looking for the logos, but sometimes people use pathos and ethos too, and it's involved, and there's still logos involved. So our task is always to disentangle it. Although there's of course times when people use nothing but pathos, and there's nothing beneath it. So it should go by a case-by-case basis, article by article. Where's the logos? Is it entangled with the pathos? Is there something that this person is really saying that's worth listening to, in other words? Okay, folks, so I'm going to end it there. I think that covers the major points and ideas, all the major ideas from Chapter 1.